Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to episode number 330 of The Zombie Train. I'm your host, Ellis, otherwise known as the Admiral, and this week we're taking a question from our very own Captain Tank Traincraft, who asks, something actually fairly interesting, did you guys transport any military equipment and use them, like tanks, RVs, armored cars, etc.? So, I'll start off by saying, did we use them? No, typically. We didn't have the logistics system in place to make use of proper military vehicles, because military vehicles, in general, are fairly thirsty. They take a lot of gas, and they take a lot of maintenance, because despite the fact that, for the most part, these things are designed to be operating in, well, war zones, they're also designed to be operating with an active supply chain. So, despite the fact that we had a pretty easy time getting our hands on these sorts of things, no, we didn't make use of them. At least not generally. The military did, and we were part of their supply chain at points, but it wasn't us. So I can't claim to do that. But that does mean the first part of your question is a definite yes. We did transport all sorts of military equipment, usually just military supplies and troops, but armored vehicles, or at the very least, gasoline-powered, road-based transports, whether that be IFVs, or, like Humvees and stuff like that, deuce and a halves, whatever, we did plenty of that. Plenty of areas were places that we couldn't get to by train, so we couldn't drop people off at the front line, if you can call it that, wherever they decided to set up a front line. What we could do is get them within a stone's throw. We had an entire, I guess you could call it a division of the Zombie Train Incorporated, dedicated to building basically temporary camps for the military, or coordinating with their infrastructure people, with their, the Civil Engineering Corps, or the Corps of Engineers, I should say, to get these things set up, because generally if they wanted to have an offensive that was not in a major city, you would go out there, you'd build some temporary sidings and stuff like that, and some temporary defenses, and from there they would attract a load of zombies and kill them all. So, that was fairly standard procedure for a long time, especially out, not exactly deep in the Great Plains, but in those sorts of areas. We ran we helped run a lot of campaigns like that would help us take down these huge groups of zombies. Generally, if it was a really big group, we would have more than one station. We would try to divide and conquer in the proper sense of the term, where we would try to split up the pack, which is fairly difficult to do, because they'll generally just go to the closest thing, or the thing they heard most recently. So if you detonate two bombs, basically, equidistant from a large group, at approximately the same time, then you can probably split the pack. Which is something that the military got very good at doing, and we would help with. We would bring them out to locations where they wanted to do this, or at least bring them out to places where they could get scout vehicles on the road out to do this. Now, it's just something that we helped with. Actually, if you want to wind back the clock all the way to Yonkers, we did use military equipment. It's not the kind that you're asking, of course. It was basically stationary guns mounted on flat cars. They turned us into an armored train very briefly, or at least an armed one. And we fought that way. That was, a fairly unique occurrence. The train that attacked Annex, so Beta Rail, but Beta Rail with a little bit of an upgrade, had some guns on it. I believe 40 mils and a couple of other things that they were using, again, sort of like an armored train, because they knew they were chasing down almost what you might call a roving fortress. They didn't really know what they were up against, but they knew they were up against something. they almost turned those guns on us before they knew who we were when we had originally gone to rescue them. But, again, not really your question, because, strapping some Bofors to a flat car, or, a 3-inch gun to a flat car, is not really what you're talking about. Tanks and that sort of thing, they weren't used in World War Z after Yonkers, basically. They were used a little bit in some of the ground engagements against other humans, but fighting zombies, they were largely ineffective. I mean, canister shells did a job, and there were a handful of units that were in modified, I mean, I wouldn't really call them tanks, but I mean, it stretches the term. There were these experimental vehicle units that were supposed to be largely independent and go out on their own, in small groups, without any infantry, and for long periods of time. These were very, very efficient vehicles for military vehicles, and we didn't really interact with them at all because they didn't need us. They would go ahead of the army, and they were very well trained. And also, we didn't know much about them because they were kind of secret, because, to my understanding, these vehicles used like a prototype propulsion system. I don't know if it was like souped up hydrogen fuel cells or some sort of hybrid something. I don't know. It wasn't anything super ridiculous. It wasn't like they put a nuclear reactor in a tank. But with the way they guarded it, you could have believed that that's what they were doing. There were a few people in the military, in the military / government, that were absolutely nuke happy. They were super nuke, and I'm not talking about like they wanted to bomb the zombies, although some people definitely advocated for that. I'm talking about that they wanted to figure out a way to fit a nuclear reactor in anything and everything. They wanted to have nuclear-powered, massive land battleships that would be able to take on hordes of, these massive hordes of zombies all on their own and be surrounded and be firing in every direction and whatever. These are some of the things that people brought to my attention as, we want your backing on this because you have a lot of sway with the powers that be, and we think that if you're on our side, then they'll listen to us. First of all, I didn't have that much sway. It was difficult for me to convince people that I didn't have as much sway as they thought I did, because generally they would point to the 900-foot-long airship and go, well, what about that? Also, I might be butchering those figures. I literally just pulled that number out of my rear end. I don't know if that's accurate at all. Hold on. Yeah, no, actually, that was pretty close. So, sorry, I just had to pull it up real quick because I didn't remember it all, and I'm thinking that doesn't seem right. Maybe I just way underestimated him. I'm talking like I have a tiny blimp that I roam around in. No, not that that's anything to sneeze at, but airships are really, really big. You really don't get the idea of how big an airship is until you're hanging out next to one and realize that they're multiple football fields, like ocean liner and beyond massive. It is by far, I don't know how it stacks up against the largest airships of all time, but it's up there. It's really up there. I mean, it blows away anything heavier than air that's ever flown. So, anyway, I'm getting off track. So there were these vehicles. They pitched to us, this is what I'm trying to get to. They pitched to us a nuclear-powered locomotive that would be able to pull everything that we could possibly ask for in a train, and would never need to refuel, and da-da-da-da-da. It would also prevent me from having children and give me cancer within the first few years, but that wasn't important. When I asked about radiation, they said you could wear a lead suit. Right. Let me defend my train from zombies while wearing a radiation-proof suit that I can't even, like, put my eye down to the scope on a rifle, or the sights on a rifle. Right, yeah, let me do that. But you'd be perfectly safe in the cab. Well, sometimes I'm not in the cab. I don't want to live in my roving fortress. I wanted to, whatever. That's neither here nor there. That is many years gone. I don't know if that person was ever taken seriously, but clearly there was some experimental vehicle development going on because of these things. I only ever got to see them once, and I never got to get acquainted with the vehicles themselves. We had to transport them very briefly from one side of the Rocky Mountains to the other, so that they could be released into the Great Plains, which is where they were supposed to operate. I don't know how effective they were, or how useful they were. I only know that I didn't hear about them again. So that either means that their mission was totally successful, and they were able to exist out on the Great Plains with no resupply and no assistance for an indefinite period of time until the war came to an end, or they were all lost, and we never heard about them because the Navy just sort of buried their existence. I don't know. I notice that there is conspicuously no entry about them in Max Brooks's book about the war. So I tend to lean towards the latter because honestly, it seemed a little crackpot, if you ask me. But then again, so does stealing a steam locomotive and rolling around the country with it, trying to save the world or whatever we thought we were doing back then. So, anyway, I digress. The vehicles that the military used, we learned at Yonkers, in general, were completely inadequate for fighting zombies. And by the time we had effectively no supply chain, there was virtually no advantage to them whatsoever. You could do more in a Humvee with a mounted MG than you could in an M1 Abrams. Like, a lot more. So, when we did move stuff, it was lighter vehicles that could go long distances, and oftentimes that could carry a lot of people, or a lot of supplies, or a little bit of both. So, yeah, it was this image of power before Yonkers, I guess, that with the might of the U.S. military, we could do anything. We could conquer the world if we decided to. And very quickly we realized that we were fighting an enemy that really didn't care what we thought, that didn't at all fit in with what we thought enemies were supposed to be like. And because of that, we had a hell of a time and had to adapt, and that's why we were so far behind. We talk about the Alpha teams before the war really began being, the best of the best. They knew exactly what they were doing. They could be dropped into any situation, and they would be able to, they'd be able to kill the zombies and get out of there. But the fact of the matter is, as glorious as that might sound, they didn't do their job very well. They certainly didn't pass on the information to the rest of the military, A, because it was a secret, and B, because clearly nobody had any strategy. I mean, granted, I may not be giving them enough credit, and people might just not have listened, but the people that I talked with in the Navy, and the rest of the military, but again, I have to clarify every time, because the Navy was basically all that was left. Also, that might be the reason that people wanted nuclear-powered everything so much, because if you look at naval vessels, it seems kind of obvious. If we can do that with the Navy, then we can do that with anything. Not to mention the fact that, at that point in time, all that we had left was nuclear-powered vessels, because we didn't have any fuel. But the people that I talked with seemed very receptive to figuring out a way, like really figuring out ways to fight our enemy. And they did, to their credit, they did. I don't know about those special vehicles, but, not everything worked. I just want to make sure I cover the question here. Yeah. So, I hope I did answer your question properly. There's a response to this. Was there a reply to this? Was it me? Did I reply to it? Let's find out. Never mind, it won't load. Oh well. So, yeah. We have another military question coming up next week, so stay tuned. This has been the Admiral, signing off.